Well, welcome. My name again is Chuck Evans. I'm senior partner at Better Schools LLC. We are a group that provides consulting services for strategy, financial planning, leadership development, and other, sometimes every once in a while, some faculty development and training for Christian schools, a good portion of whom are classical schools. We also work with a lot of quite a number of parochial schools that are denominational, Lutheran, Baptist, other schools. So we end up with a nice mix of independent schools as well as parochial schools, and then a nice denominational mix in the schools that we work with, both classical and also more conventional schools. To tell you a little bit about myself and sort of how I got here and how I spend my time, my wife Julie and I have 7 kids. We have 2 left at home. I wish there was just one. So it's not that I don't like them, but it's like I'm trying to, figure out how to get them to dislodge a little bit. So he just graduated from high school, and our youngest is going to be a junior this year. And then we have 5 kids who are grown-ish and either in college or out of the house and doing their own thing. Sorry. Let's see. We have 3 dogs, 2 cats, a rabbit who lives in our closet in our master bathroom. My wife is a public school English teacher. She teaches on the east side of Austin, where we live. I tell her that she teaches in the least diverse school in Austin ISD. Everybody's brown and everybody's poor. So that's her world and her mission field has been for the last 25 years. So the rabbit is the classroom pet, but he can't stay there in the summertime or on weekends, so he lives in our bathroom, in our closet. So anyway, I don't know why I told you that. So just get a little picture of my world. It's not all that buttoned up. So I took my first position as a head of a classical school in 1996. I was the founding head of Faith Christian School in Roanoke, Virginia. I grew up in the D.C. area and spent the first 9 years or so of my career teaching and pastoring and then leading the school in Roanoke. Went from there to a large Episcopal school in Raleigh, North Carolina, and then found my way to Austin, Texas to be the head of Regent School, which is one of the larger classical Christian schools in the country. And then when I was finished in 2006 at Regents, I really, really didn't want to leave Austin because I had sort of found my home. It's just a great place to live, and so I started consulting with a group called Paideia Incorporated and was with them for 5 years and started Better Schools in 2011. So like I said, we do a lot of things with for schools, with schools. I was thinking about it just a couple of days ago. How do I characterize our work as consultants? When I first started consulting, what I really thought was that people were paying me to give them advice. And what I realized early in is that what I'm really doing is encouraging people to act on what they believe is best for their school and to think about the future and to have some encouragement and resources to pursue that future. So I don't give a whole lot of advice in the end. What I do is I just kind of help people sort of find a vision for your school and figure out how you're going to pursue that vision effectively. When Jackie asked me to do 4 sessions on the lifespan of a school, you were the one who asked me originally, yes. I was a little bit perplexed, and I will tell you that it's hard. It's hard to, to figure out how you're going to pursue that vision effectively. When Jackie asked me to do 4 sessions on the lifespan of a school, I was a little bit perplexed, and I will tell you that it's hard. It's hard to figure out how you're going to pursue that vision effectively. When Jackie asked me to do 4 sessions on the lifespan of a school, I was a little bit perplexed, and I will tell you that to divide, just like it is with a person or a child, it's hard to divide, the lifespan into these very nice, neat categories, because everything sort of runs together, and there are elements that happen in a school in each of those stages that we're going to be talking about that happen in all of those stages in one form or another. So we're going to do some crisscrossing and overlapping, and it's not going to maybe be super tidy in terms of how we move from one stage to the next. But as an organizing principle, what I'm focusing on are the elements of the organization, the elements of school as an institution that will likely be most prominent in these early, middle, and later stages of a school's life, and that are the things that both for me as a head of school and for people that I work with tend to surprise them. They go, oh, we have to do that now, those types of things. So that's how this is organized. I've also kept the outlines and the content intentionally light, because I'd like for you to feel free to ask questions about the circumstances of your own schools that would be helpful, not just for you, but maybe for everyone else to hear, because we're probably all at different stages in our schools, and maybe we're thinking about starting a school, or we have a school, and now, well, if we have a school, we want to make it a classical school, how does that work? Or we've been around for 15 or 20 years, now what do we do? So we're all at different places, but it would still probably be useful for people to hear whatever questions or comments or observations you have about. So feel free to interrupt. And like I said, I've got yes.
Sorry. Just for planning purposes,
yeah.
How are you breaking down the next three?
Yeah, it'll be sort of, I would say the first 3 years, sort of the startup, and then sort of the next 5 to 10. The next two sessions will be sort of that 5 to 10, 10 to, or 5 to 15, and then the last session will be more about sort of, 10 plus. So once we're established in the market and we kind of know who we are, starting to think more outside of ourselves. So does that help? Okay. All right. So let's get going here. If mission is why we exist and vision is where we want to go, and by the way, how many paradigms of mission, vision, definitions have you heard? I mean, every presenter, every consultant has like their own little pet definition for every tiny little word. So we're not going to get fussy about those things. So mission, vision, maybe you use them interchangeably, but we're just going to say for the purpose of this slide, mission is why we exist. This is the thing that said, hey, we need a school. The thing that gets us up in the morning and says, I really want to go to school because I believe in the purpose of this thing. And vision is where we would like to take this thing. We want to be a K-8 school, or at some point we'd like to have a high school or whatever it is. Regardless, we need both. You need both. If mission is why we exist and vision is where we're going, we need both. And I will say that in the early stages of a startup, especially, sometimes it's difficult to think in a visionary way because everything is so close. It's right up in front of your face. And we're just glad we're open. We're just glad that anybody bothered to come in the first place, and to think about where we want to be and who we want to become in 5 or 10 years, it seems sort of silly almost. It's like we're just, we're making it through the day, we're making it through the year. We didn't lose any kids. They're all still here, but we need both, and we'll talk about why that's necessary in a second. So there are 4 questions that we have to ask having to do with mission and vision. 4 questions to ask and to answer, and they're all essential. First is, who are we? Who are we? Who are we as a community? Who are we as individuals? when someone looks at us, what do they see? Who are we? Who are we theologically? Who are we academically? Who are we formationally? What are the things that matter to us most? And the second question is, for whom are we? The grammar teachers will be pleased. I really, really wanted to say, who are we here for? Who are we for? But who are we? For whom are we? Ourselves? The larger world? Our neighborhood? Our community? Something in between? Who are we here for? What will we accomplish? This year, next year, in 10 years, in 20 years, what will we accomplish? What will be the impact in the lives of children, in their families? How will the children we teach be prepared for life after our school? And then when and how are we going to accomplish these things? If you just keep asking yourself these 4 questions over and over again, maybe on an annual basis, maybe on a semi-annual basis, and reminding yourself, number one, of how you answered the questions before, but then also comparing your answers and the questions to the circumstances you find yourselves in, it'll do a lot to just help you to clarify. In that first year at Faith Christian School, I was the only full-time employee. I was the head of school. I was teaching 4 classes. We were grades 6 to 12, well, 6 to 9 to start with. We had 47 students. I mean, who knew? Go figure. 47 kids the first year. What were they thinking, those parents? But I was teaching 4 classes. I had 6th grade Latin. I had 9th grade literature. I don't know, and 2 other classes. I don't remember what it was. It was all sort of a blur. And then I had about 6 or 8 part-time teachers, and we had a faculty meeting every Friday afternoon after school, which was also a really dumb idea. Who has a faculty meeting on Friday afternoon? It's like, we didn't know. We didn't know that you're not supposed to do that. And it must have been halfway through the first semester or so, they're all sitting there waiting for me. I walk in, and one of the teachers, her name is Rhonda Clark, and she just retired from that school, looked across the table and said, "So, Chuck, what kind of school are we going to be this week?" I was like, that's not nice, Rhonda. That is not nice. We were all over the place. I mean, we knew we were going to be a classical school, and we knew what, curricularly, sort of what we were, and we knew generally what our philosophy of education was, but who were we? And what were we? Why were we here? I mean, in what manner were we here to assist these kids? We really hadn't answered these questions all that carefully. We got there eventually, but we just had to remind ourselves that we haven't thought this through all that well yet. And so this is a way, sort of a formula. 3 questions having to do with leadership. So that's mission and vision, and then leadership. What entity will be the final authority for your school? And it's not God. Okay, that's not the answer. I mean, it is the answer, but all right. This is especially complicated in parochial schools. Now, in an independent school, you have a board, and that's it. I mean, it's very simple. In a parochial school, it tends to be more complicated. I said to someone that over a period of about 3 years, I worked with 12 parochial schools on various things, some financial planning stuff, some leadership development. A couple schools needed big strategic plans. One school we were just trying to figure out how to keep the thing open. So they're all over the place. Of those 12 schools, not one of those schools operated like any one of the other schools. They all had a different organizational structure, different combinations of authority, different kinds of relationships to the congregation or to the denomination or to the district. It was amazing to me. So I believe that there are an infinite number of ways for parochial schools and churches to organize themselves. But the first question we have to ask is, who's in charge? Who's in charge? Does the pastor decide whether the school stays open or closes? Does the congregation decide? And how? Is there going to be a school board? Are they going to answer to a church council? What are going to elders? All right. So who makes the final calls for the school? And once we determine that, we've written it down and we've put it in bylaws and we've adopted it however it is that it needs to be adopted, we've got to stick to it. We've got to stick to it. Because more than anything, what schools need as institutions is they need predictability and they need order. And when you've got a chain of command and people feel free to just sort of come in sideways and interrupt that chain of command, things start to go wobbly really, really quickly in all sorts of different ways. So that's the first question. Who's the final authority? What entity will be responsible for the school's two first and foremost needs? We'll get to the needs in a second. But who will be the primary caretaker of the school? It probably should be whoever is the final authority, but it might not be. There might be a final authority above the entity, whether it's a board or a council or something else, that has primary responsibility for the two first priorities. And the two first priorities are these. Number one, preserve and protect the mission. Go back to our 4 questions. Once we've answered those first 4 questions, that's our mission. That is our identity. And someone's got to be primarily responsible for preserving that. And it can't be the headmaster. It's got to be someone more removed and more permanent than the headmaster. Though I know Pastor Keyser is as permanent as they get as a headmaster. But headmasters come and go. They do, and they will. And then the second priority is the fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the enterprise of the school, even though it's a ministry, is intact and sustainable. Someone has to be responsible to make sure that the decisions that are being made about the operation of the school leave the school in a stronger position year after year after year, not in a weakened position year over year. So mission and fiduciary responsibilities are the two primary occupations of whoever it is gets this job, whether it's a board, whether it's your church council, whoever it is. And then third, what does the head of school do? Or the principal, whatever you call them. Yes?
I guess I'm kind of curious because I would have first answered question number 2 with the headmaster.
Right.
And so are you saying that sometimes, never can the headmaster be the one that's responsible for that?
I would recommend that this be a collective responsibility, that there be a board or a council or a commission that is collectively responsible for those two primary responsibilities. The headmaster, of course, is responsible for those, but like I said, he or she is a single person. And it's a lot of responsibility for one person within the context, especially within a parochial context. All right, they need support. I mean, the principal needs somebody to say, "Hey, folks, what do we do?" Or, "Hey, folks, here's what I think we can. Here's what I think we should do. How do we make this happen?" So, what does the head of school do? In addition to their cooperation with whatever this entity is, What will be the scope of their responsibilities? Now, in a conventional independent school environment, it's a fairly easy answer. So the board has 3 responsibilities. The mission preservation, the fiduciary responsibility, and they hire and fire the head of school. And then the head of school does everything else. Everybody works for him. The head of school is the board's only employee. Nobody else in the organization works for the board. Everybody works for the head of school. So it's very clean in an independent school. But in a congregational environment, it's not going to be as obvious, always. So is the head of school on the pastoral team? Do they have other responsibilities besides running the school? Do they have exclusive responsibility for who they hire as employees of the school, even though those employees of the school are also probably in some way employees of the church? See how things start to get a little messy? All of a sudden your org chart has like all these lines running this way and that way and that way. So the cleaner you can make it, the better. And even if, this is not just in startup. It's great if you can get this all organized in your startup, but if you're 10 or 15 years in and you still have all those lines running sideways in the organizational chart, probably the next planning retreat might be a good idea to step back and say, let's see if we can clean this up a little bit and get everybody clear on what their job is and what their responsibilities are. Governance and leadership matter so much to the life and stability of a school. And if you have a school in which people are uncertain about who is responsible for what, who has the authority to do what, it makes so many things hard that shouldn't be hard. Things become political, things become emotional, things become, complicated. So if we can be clear on these questions, then we've got ourselves, we're in a better position. Now, policies and procedures. In a startup, we have a tendency, often, sort of write policies as we need them. And so we end up with these policy manuals after about 10 or 11 years where they're very thick, they're very disorganized, right? They're in alphabetical order for whatever, well, let's just put it in alphabetical order, might as well. And as we read it, we go, oh, that's the Sherry Jones policy. Because whatever happened with Sherry Jones, we wanted to make sure it never happens again. And so there's a policy for that situation. So what I generally recommend is, poor Sherry, she gets a lot of abuse in my seminars. What I recommend is that you start by adopting somebody else's policy manual. Don't wait to write it all yourself. There are literally millions of policy manuals out there, and you don't have to do it all yourself. And take advantage of all of the mistakes and revisions that someone else did, and then use that as your template. And then you'll add your own policies over time, probably, because you have your own circumstances, and you have your whatever you have. But make sure that policies and procedures, you start with something that is sound. And your basic priorities in those first few years: number one, make sure the children are protected. It's easy to take this one for granted. Well, duh, of course we're going to protect the children, right? But the policies that we need first and foremost are the ones that safeguard children from harm, either from someone else or from us, as awful as that is to think about. So we start with policies that protect and safeguard children. And then secondly, think about what parents need to know and how they need to be assured that we know what we're doing. that their children are, number one, safe, and their children are number two, being cared for in the way that we have promised. If you poll parents of private school kids, and you ask them, this happens all the time, it's been going on for 30 years, it always comes out the same way. You ask them, why do you have your child in private school? The number one answer in almost every survey is safety. Safety. I want my child safe. And they don't just mean physical safety, though they mean it more now than they used to. I mean, when I was last a full-time head of school in 2006, our security measure was basically keep doors locked, or try to remember to keep the doors locked. You know, I mean, that was okay. That was our safety protocol. Doors were propped open all the time. You know, I mean, we weren't worried. But 2 years ago, 17, 18, I was the interim head at the Covenant School in Dallas, school of about 600 kids. In middle of the year, I hired a guy with a gun to be on campus all the time. So the world has changed a lot. But parents, as much as they're concerned about that, what other kinds of safety are they concerned about? What? Emotional safety? Spiritual safety? Relational, what? Yeah. Safety from sexual predators. Online safety. You know, it's a dangerous world. We know that. You have kids. You know what you're worried about and what you think about. But we have to have policies that assure parents that we understand the things that concern them, and we've got this. We've got this. And then lastly, what do we expect in terms of professional performance from our employees? So the people who are responsible for using these policies to protect children and to assure parents, what do we expect from them? How will we evaluate their performance? Because whether you feel like it or not, you are now an educational professional. And there are certain expectations, both culturally understood, but also that need to be specified within the context of your school that go with that. This is now a job. Think about that for a second. Yes, it's a calling, and yes, you might feel like we're volunteering ourselves to a great extent, especially in the beginning. But it's a job. And jobs are things for which you get hired, and they're things from which you get fired. So how do we make those decisions about the people who are in our employment?
This is a struggle in ours because we have a board member who says, you don't have a teaching certificate from a public school, therefore you're not, but we feel we are very knowledgeable in what we're teaching.
Right.
It becomes a very...
If you're getting paid to teach, you're a professional teacher. It doesn't matter whether you went to college or have a certificate or whatever. And that goes back to the clarification of policy. This is an important policy. What qualifies a person to be a professional in our employment? One board member's opinion about what that should be is irrelevant until it's in the policy. That entity that we talked about above the headmaster, until that entity has adopted it. So that board member can propose as a policy, our teachers need to be licensed or state credentialed. But if it's not adopted as a policy, then it's not a criteria. But we have to specify what are our expectations.
And that would take a lot of stress off the whole situation.
Yeah, write it down. Propose something, vote on it, and say, this is our policy. This is what qualifies a person to teach in our school. And this is what disqualifies a person from teaching in our school, either once they're in our employment or before we employ them. Be very specific about those types of things. Again, we need predictability. Parents need to know who is responsible for their kids and what they are required to do. And if we just sort of stumble along instead of, end up writing something down 3 or 4 years in, we're going to have a rough start. We're going to have a harder time convincing parents to trust us, even if they know us. Even if they know us. Have you noticed that those of you who are in the early stages or have been through a startup, maybe in your congregation, that even let's put it this way. The parents who you're friends with at church are going to send their kids to the school in which you now work. Have you noticed how your relationship with them changes? It's a whole nother level, as they say. Because they're putting so much more confidence and they're putting so much more trust in you now than they did when you were just acquaintances. You're not babysitting. You are responsible for this child's future. So they need to know how you're preparing to do that. Here's the thing we don't like to talk about. My mentor, Bruce Lockerbie, was one of the first people in the Christian school environment back in the 80s to start talking to Christian schools about the importance of financial planning for their schools and sustainability. And it got to the point where there was so much friction between him and people in the larger Christian school, leadership movement that he started getting blackballed from conferences because they didn't want to hear about the relationship between ministry and money and how necessary it is to think those things through and how badly things can go for the ministry if we don't take care and we don't think carefully enough about the money. I have a phrase, I don't think I put it in any of these slides, but it's a sort of a mashup of a couple of things that I've heard from people. So, number one, no mission, no money. Right? If what we're seeking to achieve as ministry isn't compelling, no one's going to give to it, no one's going to pay for it. No margin, no mission. If we don't have enough financial flexibility to operate in a way that is sustainable, no matter how compelling our mission is, it will fail or be debilitated. It will not be as effective as we know we want it to be. So no mission, no money, no margin, no mission. Just file that away. So what do we need to do? We need to ascertain our market. We need to look around and figure out, other than the 6 parents who have approached us, who wants this? Who wants this? And there are a couple of traps to avoid early on. The first is the notion that somehow we are going to be able to provide a high-quality, private, Christian, Lutheran education that is affordable. You can't. What's the problem with the word affordable? What's a problem with the word affordable?
Everybody's affordability is different.
It's relative. Someone might be able to afford a $10,000 tuition, and someone might not be able to afford a $500 tuition. So for whom is that affordable? So affordability as a goal, as a premise, is always going to disappoint. You're always going to find yourself either feeling like you've been disingenuous because this isn't affordable for someone, or you're going to find yourself artificially trying to suppress the cost of what you're doing because you're trying to be more affordable, but you're damaging the enterprise. You're damaging the mission by doing that. So just take affordability and stick it, throw it away. It's not a thing in schools. All right, and we'll get more into the financial modeling and other stuff in the other sessions. The other thing is this: look around you at the schools that are most like yours, that look like they're thriving, that have full classrooms, that have buses, that have sports teams, all the things that you might want for your school, and look at what they're charging, and figure out what their revenue streams are, and then compare that to what you think you're going to be able to do. All right? Because if you can't, I mean, if they've been around for 30 years and their school is flourishing, they've figured some things out. And one of the things they've probably figured out is there's no inexpensive way to do this. Because quality education is expensive. It just is. So learn from them, even if it's not your denomination. If you're down in Houston and want to start a Lutheran school, I'd go down to St. Francis Episcopal School and look at how they're doing it. Because they're doing it right. They're doing something right. They're not classical, and they're not Lutheran, and other things. But they have a going concern. They're achieving their mission, right? Yeah.
To your knowledge, are the Catholic schools under that same kind of challenge? I mean, is there the ecclesiastical environment providing funding sources that are unique to them?
Yes. Catholic schools are a little more complicated because a lot of they have a diocesan structure around them, especially in a place like Chicago or a big place like Houston or someplace else. So big markets, they have a diocesan structure around them, and it's hard to tell exactly for any individual school what revenue streams they have available to them apart from tuition and maybe some congregational support. So it's a little harder to analyze. But I mean, the Lutheran tradition is complicated. This whole idea of how to pay for it and who's going to be responsible to pay for it is complicated by the parochial traditions in the Lutheran, in the Missouri Synod at least, where 100 years ago school was free. If you were a member of the church, your kid went to Lutheran school for free and the congregation paid for it. I mean, it wasn't until the early 80s or mid 80s that some of the schools I know in Texas even started to charge tuition at all. So there's still this residue, this residual expectation in the back of our collective denominational minds that says, as a Lutheran parent, as a tithing member of a congregation, I have a right, I am entitled to a Lutheran education for my child. Okay, but someone has to pay for it, right? And you think about the congregations that you know, or the congregations that you serve in, and very few Lutheran kids go to school for free anymore. Do they? They don't have faith, right? Do they?
They pay somebody, but we still have tuition free K to 8.
K through 8.
Yes.
Wow. That's expensive for someone, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yes. You do? Where?
St. Paul Hamill.
Where?
St. Paul Hamill, Southern Illinois.
Oh, Southern Illinois. Okay. Yeah. And it works? Working. Good. There are still, how about you guys? Your congregations?
We have tuition.
You have tuition, yeah. there are, in the Christian Reformed environment, there are still little pockets still where that's the case. It's just it's so uncommon anymore. And if you're brand new and you approach your congregation and say, hey, we want to start a brand new school, what do you think about, helping us to the tune of $1 million a year? That's a tough sell. That is a tough sell. Determining true cost. So figure out what's going on in the market. Understand that affordability is probably not possible except in very rare circumstances. And then figure out what the true cost is to operate your school, which means everybody gets paid something that's representative of market rate. So it doesn't mean that they're necessarily making as much as a public school teacher might, but they're making enough that this is a career. And that we have all the positions that we need in order to ensure the safety of the children and the connectedness with parents. We have all those positions staffed. And we're not spreading all of this responsibility out to people who are already overworked. Now, I'm not saying that that's how you have to start, but you need to start with determining that cost because the laws of physics apply in Lutheran school just like they do everywhere else. Gravity works the same way in Lutheran schools as it does in other Christian schools and in public schools. Yes. When you throw a pencil in the air, it still falls down. It doesn't float. Yes.
When you talk a living wage, it's not really fair to compare people who only work 9 months out of the year with people who work 12 months out of the year, and they have all those long vacations.
So says the professor. I don't use the word, that's why I don't use the term living wage. I'm more concerned about market rate. So what would a teacher make in that parochial school that we compared ourselves to, where everything's going so good and they figure a lot of stuff out? What are they paying their teachers? They're probably not paying them as much as public school teachers, and they might not even be paying them as much as independent schools, but what they're paying is holding people in place. So figure that out. Learn the laws of physics. Yeah.
Do you find
I'm gonna cut you off on the questioning here in just a second, Dr. Tallman. No.
that was only my second? So
You get 3.
okay, thank you. Do you find that there are schools that are thriving, but on the backs of their staff, that they're really not, they're profitable because they're not paying on that?
Okay. So I'll say, yes, they might be profitable, but I wouldn't call that thriving.
Yeah.
Just because I'm profitable, if I'm profitable by cannibalizing my people, then I'm probably not thriving.
That's an easy way to do it.
Yeah. And it's the most common way. I mean, private schools have done this for generations. We're so concerned with this affordability question, and we're so concerned about, how we're perceived by families according to what we charge, that we just keep, it's like the lid of a trash can that's too full. We're just kind of constantly pushing down on it, and the people who are paying the costs are our employees. I mean, it's the only industry where you actually pay for someone else to consume your product as an employee. So all of our teachers, to the extent that we're not paying them a fair or a just or a market rate, all of our teachers are providing tuition assistance. They're providing financial aid to all the kids that they teach. So that's something to keep in mind.
That is because it is hard to compete against free school, even though they must know they're getting what they paid for. It's still hard
Yeah.
to compete
It is hard to compete, yeah. And we are primarily competing, we're not competing against the other not free. We're competing against free, primarily. Most parents, if they're going to leave our schools, they're going to homeschool, which is not free, but still, or they're going to public school, which is also not free, but they don't see the bill. So, I mean, we are competing. And we'll talk in the next segment or the segment after that about what that means for us in terms of, how we organize ourselves. Yeah.
I was just wondering how areas where they have school vouchers.
Yeah.
Has that shown to help or not at all?
Yeah, it helps a lot. It helps a lot. So if you're in Pennsylvania or Arizona or Indiana or some of the other states that have vouchers or tax credit scholarships or whatever form the school choice funding takes, it helps a whole lot. And it helps parochial schools probably more than any other, because our tuitions, even when we're charging what we should charge, our tuitions generally are going to be lower than an independent school for a variety of reasons. So it's actually super beneficial. It might not be safe, depending on what state you're in. It might not be safe to rely on that, and you have to be careful and you have to think things through. But yeah, you can get a lot more kids in your school if somebody else is paying the bill, for sure. Then we need to design for adequate revenue, which means we have to think about where is the money going to come from? What are our options? And we have to think ahead, and I'll just say, think ahead about what that's going to mean. So we don't walk into this enterprise, into the startup, thinking, well, the congregation will always be good for X. If the congregation hasn't said, we'll always be good for X. And we can't walk in, again, with underestimated ideas about what this might cost someone, an individual or a family, for their child. So we think through. I mean, we have a tendency when we plan in schools, when we write budgets in school, we start with costs and eventually we get around to revenue and like, oh, I wonder how we're going to pay for all this. And then we go, well, we probably can't, so we start cutting on the cost side. But what I encourage is that we think first about the revenue. What will be our most reliable revenue stream, and how do we maximize it? And what will be the second, and what will be the third, and what proportion should we plan to be relying on those revenue streams as we think about our school growing? That's the thinking that we have a tendency to come to late, when we should have been thinking about that earlier. And for most of us, it's going to come down to, it's going to be tuition. I mean, if you don't have a congregation that is fundamentally, philosophically all in for Christian education and wanting every member or every person in your community to have access to it, it's going to end up being tuition as your primary revenue stream. So what is that going to mean? That's what we're asking ourselves. What is that going to mean, and how do we plan for that? Any questions or comments about that at the startup? I didn't cover everything probably that you had to think about. You notice I haven't talked about curriculum. I haven't talked about teaching. I haven't talked about philosophy, because those are the things that we always pretty much cover. That's what gets us motivated. This is the stuff we forget. That we go, I've never met a classical school startup that didn't know exactly what their philosophy was and how they envisioned teaching and running their classrooms. I have met a lot of startups who don't have a budget before they start, or don't know how they're going to govern themselves.
Okay, this is going to be kind of a complicated question. In the book, Wisdom and Eloquence.
Yes.
So I don't know if it was your comment or if it was Mr. Littlejohn's comment.
Did you agree with it?
In the appendix.
It probably was Robert.
The chapter on starting a new school.
Yeah.
And I think that someone wrote, if you can't have a beautiful building, don't even start.
Yeah, Robert, that's Robert's aesthetic.
Okay,
Yeah,
because most of us can't pull a beautiful new building out of our pocket.
yeah,
And we're, we have
Yeah.
a church building and the church wants a school, and so we get the Sunday school rooms.
yeah.
So I just wondered if you would kind of talk on that, about
Yeah.
the aesthetics of a building, and where does that play in when you're starting out?
Well, and I don't think Robert meant that if you can't start a school in a beautiful building, don't try to start a school. I think what he means more is that don't discount the importance of aesthetics in a child's experience in school, and always just sort of make do with the thing that's least expensive, because the thing that's more expensive, because it's more beautiful or it's more durable, just seems like it's so far out of reach. That would be probably more what that would be the bigger gist of what he's thinking. Because what we do, I mean, so when I got to Regents, the school that I was the head of in Austin, they had about 500 kids, and we had a gym, which was very nice, and we had a classroom building in the back that had middle and upper school in it, so grades 6 or 7 to 12. I think it was 7 to 12 at the time. And then everybody else in the front of the campus was in portables. So we had 500 students in the school, and about 350 of them were in portable buildings. And they weren't shabby. I mean, it didn't look like a trailer park. They had nice decks, and they had put them in, amongst the live oaks. They didn't cut down trees and stuff like that. So it wasn't unattractive, but it was not just aesthetically not all that great, but it was functionally not great. We needed a building. It was unsafe. It was less safe, right? So you have all those doors, and a tornado would have just taken the school, down into the neighborhood. So all of those things, and so we didn't know exactly what to do, but we built a building. I mean, we worked hard, and we cast a vision, and we raised money that we didn't think that we were going to be able to raise, because and it's a beautiful building, limestone arches, and more beautiful than I thought it was going to be when we first started getting to it. And that sort of, it follows on that same kind of
Well, I appreciate
idea.
that. We don't have to all start out with brand new school buildings.
No, you don't. And you likely won't. Well, and I'll say this too. This is also one of the advantages. Parochial schools get a bad rap because people have a tendency to think about all the complicating factors of a school as a ministry operating within the confines of a church with lots of other ministries, and they all sort of compete for resources in one way or another. If it's not space, it's whatever. I talk about the Olivia Wendell Memorial Bible Study Room. So the Olivia Wendell Memorial Bible Study classroom, of course named after Olivia Wendell, who started the Ladies Bible Study in 1963, and it's still going in 2019. And about 1983, they gave it its own room, and it gets used on Tuesday mornings at 10 a.m. every week. And then the school starts a reading resource, a learning resource program, and they need a place to go to tutor kids for their pullouts. And the only room available on the campus is the Olivia Wendell Memorial Bible Study Room, which is used on Tuesdays at 10 a.m., but we're not allowed to use it. On Monday, or you know this, right? You have one of these rooms in your church. So those are the types of things that we tend to focus on. But think about what a gift it is to a school, for a church to have capitalized at least a significant portion of the facility. I mean, what makes independent schooling so expensive? The reason that they have to charge $18,000 when a parochial school can charge $12,000 is because of the capital costs. And churches can give this beautiful gift to their schools of taking that cost way down. and in some ways, just providing more financial flexibility and faster rates of growth even, potentially. Yeah.
Question about climate. You made reference.
It's getting hotter.
Yes.
That's what I hear.
You made reference to the historical aspects of Lutheran education. I'm in an area of southern Minnesota where we have some successful Catholic high schools, but with the progressive agenda that's coming through the public schools, clarion voices like Rod Dreyer, who says, get your kids out of public school, gender dysphoria and all that stuff. Is there an environment in which public school or private school Lutheran education is going to be seen more favorable, that it's worth the cost to get my kid out of this environment? Will it ever reach a threshold that it's going to be seen as a priority, or is that economic factor still going to be always the competition?
I'm not sure how to say it. I'll say it this. I kind of hope not, for historical reasons. That by my reading, one of the main impetuses of the larger Christian school movement in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s that grew phenomenally. And I've got just amazing statistics in terms of rates of growth and the number of students, number of schools, and all of this stuff. It was fueled by a fear. And the boogeyman back then was secular humanism, what they called secular humanism. And those schools were able to establish themselves essentially as secular humanism-free oases, but they didn't do anything else. They didn't teach better. They didn't organize better. They didn't fund better. As a matter of fact, other than being the oasis away from secular humanism and praying and going to chapel, they did almost everything worse than public schools. So I hope that what we get, the growth that we get, isn't because people are running from something. It's because they're seeing the value of what a classical education in a Lutheran context, how well that can prepare a child for the world and life. That's what I hope. And you will get some people who are afraid of the gender-free bathrooms, probably.